Can everyone hear me?
I can.
I can.
Actually, I can see other people talking and I can't hear them, so I'm going to need to leave the meeting and rejoin, see what's going on here. If someone else wants to take over leadership of the meeting, that probably would be for the best since I'm having technical difficulties.
I've got to leave in 15 minutes, so I'm probably not the best person to lead it.
I'm on a hotspot, so probably also not the best, but I can try. For as long as my internet connection attempts to hold out.
We got Mitch back. Mitch, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Nice.
You all were playing on Bluetooth in a different room.
Ah, that's fun. I was just saying, John's got to leave, and then I'm on hotspot. So you want to try kick off the sharing again?
Yeah, can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Yep.
All right, let's try this again. So we've got a relatively light agenda today. I expect we'll be able to get through it. If you have other items, feel free to bump at the bottom of the list. If we don't make it this week, we always put it at the agenda for next meeting. So first up is Keith.
Yeah, I honestly forgot about this topic until saw the agenda, but this was sort of a continuation of last week's discussion on Tomato refactoring. I think we actually might have addressed it somewhat, but TLDR, upstream Kubernetes is continuing to sort of move forward with the MCS style of explicit import and export. You see this in multi-cluster inferencing specifically, and even with Gateway API, there's talk of a composite backend resource that has similar semantics to the way that MCS works. And so historically, Istio has had a different model for service discovery, mainly because it predates the creation of the MCS protocol. And right now, it seems like there are, well, let me back up. A lot of the opposition and concerns with MCS in the context of ambient multi-cluster was around sort of the front end aspect, if I recall correctly. So the DNS needing to use a different host name to get the benefits, etc. Wanting to see, if anybody has any strong feelings about how we move forward with sort of the upstream Kubernetes approach of importing and exporting, and maybe making that more first class in Istio. There's an existing MCS controller, but that hasn't been touched in a very long time. So just wanted to sort of get the community's feedback on upstream Kubernetes direction and what Istio should do about it, if anything.
Sorry, I think I missed. Is there broader context for bringing this discussion up again now?
Yeah, the context for me specifically is the multi-cluster, the inference pool import within Gateway API inference extension.
Okay.
And so there's stuff we could do to sort of keep it within inference semantics, but when you combine MCS and inference pool, and then I know there's been some early designs around this composite backend resource that also has similar semantics.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's starting to add up, and just wondering how much we should, should we take another look at maybe supporting this stronger instead of having like a bunch of one-off implementations of different semantics across Istio.
To better understand, like, what's the current multi-cluster different semantics that Istio has comparing to MCA?
So what Istio does is essentially the service resource. Well, we sort of give you multi-cluster service routing without checking to see if the service itself has been imported into the cluster. You don't reference any APIs. We sort of read from remote API servers, and in the official support, we read from remote API servers and sort of merge together all the different service resources, prefer in the local cluster definition if there's any conflicts, and we just sort of have multiple VIPs that exist per service that are valid whenever a client tries to call one of those VIPs in our local service. So like default support doesn't, we rely on remote API servers as a source of truth, not on any CRDs that are local to our cluster. Which, if you take the open source official implementation, there are some scalability concerns with that approach.
Right.
Because
Which
you have to,
composite-
yep.
It's not scalability, it's behavior. Always the concern was that what we are doing is breaking some applications without user knowing, and the documentation is pretty poor about the current cases. The next approach is, more secure, more safer, but more complicated in a way.
But Keith, isn't that what composite backend comes to solve, like the scalability issue?
Yes, I agree. So Istio's current approach with needing remote secrets to do anything multi-cluster has scalability challenges. I'm bringing that up mainly just to say to talk about the trade-off, right? The trade-off with Istio's remote secret approach is that you sort of get the information right from the source of the remote API server, but there's a scalability sort of limit inherent to that. But it is more complex to implement one where you're looking at where you're either where Istio is copying imports and exports back and forth and being that controller, or where Istio is reading from an upstream spec, such as composite backend or service import.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I do think, by the way, though, I do think that specifically for multi-cluster inference, I mean, this is a good discussion to have, but specifically, even if you were to support the exact semantics that upstream Kubernetes does, it's not going to solve the problem we talked about with multi-cluster inference, right? So the problem with multi-cluster inference is probably it should be a separate. I mean, not necessarily for today, but should be a separate agenda topic to say okay, do we do EPP sameness or do we do something else, et cetera, et cetera. But I figured
yes, I agree. Yeah. This is more of a general conversation for
okay.
APIs generally. Multi-cluster, this is sort of useful, but not sufficient for the multi-cluster inference pool thing. This is just more about how Istio looks at service discovery in general.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay.
Well, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mitch?
Oh, that's it? We're good?
Well,
You've got a hand raised. So I was
right.
gonna.
Sorry. Yeah, just a question for MCS. Would we be able to propagate all of the information that Istio-D needs for true multi-cluster service discovery through MCS's resources? Every time I've seen MCS used myself, it's always propagating endpoint data, which is not something we need, at least not on the ambient side, not for multi-network. We need things like number of instances, identities that are accepted for that particular service. Is that something that we can expect to get via MCS?
So endpoints is not necessarily pod endpoints. Endpoints could be the address of a remote gateway, and that's also something that is optional of using the endpoint slice on the resources like that. John has told me repeatedly that the identity bit is something which is not supportable or implementable through MCS. But I don't have a ton of clarity around what's the gap there and is that a solvable thing?
Okay.
And also, if it is a good idea to actually do it, because it's compromising the security in subtle ways. So even if it is possible, it's not clear if it's good.
Costin, can you help me
guess
understand
what
the
I'd-
compromise on security there compared to regular Istio multi-cluster?
not compared with regular Istio multi-cluster, but compared with Kubernetes, where again, the security is not based on because you are injecting. If one remote cluster is compromised, it compromises the entire mesh. That really is a problem with current Istio and with propagating the identity. There are documents, and we discussed it many times in the past.
Okay.
So I guess my fundamental question at this point is, is this year just going to be sort of on the outside of upstream Kubernetes on this? MCS was sort of a one-off, and there have been lots of discussions about sort of that particular design. But as you're looking at inference pool imports, if you're looking at composite backend and gateway API, like I see this growing consensus upstream, and Istio. Yeah, we can have our issues with the API, but I do have a concern that we're going to be, I still think we are the largest mess. I think that we do more better than most of the other things in the market. But if we're not conformant with the standard APIs, that's going to create barriers to adoption and fragmentation in the ecosystem. So if anyone's got a potential way forward, or I'll phrase it like this: if there's anything beyond just we don't like this API, I'm at the point where I feel like we need more as a community to justify and not aligning to upstream, especially with ambient, where we said that was sort of our goal. Yeah.
What is upstream? Isn't MCS like an experimental API and a random SIG that's had no updates in 5 years? Like
I would say like MCS on its own, like to be blunt, has legitimately been ignorable. Like I'm partial to it, but like it is not a bad decision to not care about it. I think what Keith is saying is like there's a lot of new discussion and new API proposals that have similar characteristics. Whether that's like this inference pool import export model or like this composite backend that's being discussed. I don't think that this is something that we need to make a bet on now as the Istio project, but it's something that like maybe we can like watch the landscape of what's happening. Like if this composite backend idea like does become a thing, like start with like a design doc of like how does this affect kind of like our internal modeling of multi-cluster services.
I think I generally agree. I definitely agree that MCS on its own is ignorable, but I think my concern is that, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the changes that it would take for Istio to adopt this different model are so significant that we would probably want some lead time, and so that's why I'm trying to. I think that's why my sense of urgency is a little bit higher, because I'm sort of attempting to read the tea leaves, and it feels like our model has been left behind, at least by upstream KK.
I think that's a
the
valid
other
concern,
issue,
and that's where I think like a design doc kind of like actually exploring in more detail like the internal modeling that Istio has and like what changes might be needed to adapt to other things like that. Like that preliminary investigation might be worth doing before adding like any direct bet on like we're going to do this change or we're going to adopt this new API.
so yes, I agree with that. I think my hesitation is that I don't want to do, because there's a lot of background there. I don't want to do that work if people are just set against it to begin with. And that's sort of my reason for trying to highlight it here.
That's fair.
Like, yes, MCS is as an API as abandonware. Well, I don't know about abandonware. There seems to be somewhat of a renewed focus on it potentially, especially with, I think that's what composite backend may be trying to help address. But there's also the interoperability perspective. Like Azure has a fleet service, GKE has a fleet service. There's Karmada. As it stands today, Istio has to be. If you just look at MCS specific, for example, Istio to some extent almost has to be the controller if you're going to use the Istio semantics for multi-cluster. Like we don't interoperate with anything. Istio has to be your source of truth. And in an era where composability across the stack is what we're trying to do with Ambient, it's what users and customers are wanting to do when it comes to their software. The lack of interop for me, and again, I'll disclaimer for my bias, I do work for a cloud provider, so like there is, I think, some that probably plays into how I see the importance of this interoperability point. But I just do have this concern about us, the current semantics in Istio, making us sort of be on an island.
Yeah, but interoperability doesn't come from adopting, like MCS is not a standard because it's a terrible API and it's not being adopted widely. Like you just said, there's all these other things with fleet services and they don't, maybe some do, but definitely not all of them use MCS. Interoperability comes from the ability to plug in arbitrary things, right?
All of them I listed use MCS or some flavor of it.
That's not really true. A flavor of it, sure. Like Google has a thing that's called multi-cluster service, but it's not the multi-cluster API. And also keep in mind, it's not meant for mesh. Like it's for gateway. It's fundamentally different. It does not scale. I think you can only have like 50 multi-cluster services last I checked. So
okay,
I don't feel that like adopting one new API is not the solution unless it's like a true universal standard like Gateway API. Where we interoperate is by being able to plug in arbitrary things that anyone can build, right? There's nothing stopping someone today from saying, I want Istio to understand Azure multi-cluster. Let's say you had a proprietary one service and build some sort of shim to bridge those. We have actually a few different ways to do that. I'm less convinced that adopting this MCS, that's a terrible API that doesn't meet any of our needs at all, that is, in my mind, abandoned and not widely adopted is the solution.
So I don't think it's actually a question about adopting MCS. MCS has been like crawling for 5 years, borderline irrelevant. I think the question is that some of the ideas of MCS around like import-export semantics and like selective exports versus like a universal global declaration has impacts on Istio's internal data structures and modeling. And those ideas are seeing traction in new APIs, which we might care about.
Yes, that. And I want to time block myself because I see the other topics, but if I wrote a doc about sort of the import-export semantics, sort of did a survey of the ecosystem and not even necessarily proposed an implementation, but just sort of talked about the work, like where we're currently not aligned with the rest of the ecosystem. Is that something that people would seriously take a look at, or am I sort of, is there more convincing I need to do on why this semantic is going to be important for the project? That's why I make sure I'm spending my effort in the right places.
I think documenting the semantics are okay. Right. Obviously, for the most part in MCS, right, service import and service export are implementation details. Right. Like one of the big problems with MCS, it was missing a higher level API.
I would point out that
yes, completely agree.
So just a tiny comment. The concept of import and export, I think we gradually added to a lot of API export. There's import export and visibility on config visibility and a lot of other things. So I don't think it's anything wrong with having fine control over what you export. The concerns usually are with details of the MCP specification, not the import and export concepts.
Well, it's important to remember in MCS, import and export are implementation details. They're infrastructure. They're not
that's what I'm saying.
semantic APIs. right? Whereas the Istio ones, like this service is visible to this other namespace, is a semantic API. Like, those are quite different things, actually.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and maybe I've not done a great job of setting this up, because I think the changes are fundamental, but implementation wise, I think it's more narrow than maybe some folks are fearing. Like it's a big change to the service discovery model of Istio, but it's not necessarily adopting a bunch of new functionality. So maybe to Louis' point, the document might help just create some clarity on what's being like on where I see the issues. So I can take that as an action item. And I agree, Costin. We've got it in some of our APIs, but it's very like it's piece by piece. Like for example, we've got it in ambient multi-cluster via this not service settings, whatever it's called. But that's sort of just in that one part of the code, and we're still shimming, like we're running that on top of the service discovery API, so at a different layer. I'm talking about a more fundamental change. So I'll take an action item to look at that and create a doc for that, and we can discuss. Thanks, everyone.
I believe I'm next. Yeah, so I joined this call 2 weeks ago to discuss the ambient support, like the SPIFFE support in ambient mode. So maybe just quick summary is that currently in non-ambient mode, it is possible to use a SPIFFE-based PKI, for example, like Spire, to issue the X59 certificate. Yeah, and for ambient mode, this doesn't work because Spire or other SPIFFE implementations don't get to identify the actual workload, but only cTunnel. And for this, we are kind of thinking of building an API into SPIFFE that allows cTunnel to pass in the PID references, and then the SPIFFE implementation collects all the attributes and issues the X59 certificate. Yeah, and last time we kind of left it off based on whether this should be a SPIFFE API or XDS, and in general, if there's appetite in the community. Yeah.
Arndt, how similar would this be to the existing Spire API? Like if I already have a client that uses Spire delegation, how big of a change would it be to move over to the SPIFFE API?
It's probably going to be the same. You probably just have to pull in other protos, do a bit of namespace renaming, and that's it. Like there's topic-wise, it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, considering you're using the PID version of it, which I assume you do, because the current delegate identity API also has a different flavor that is used in Cilium. But we actually are not a big fan of it, so we want to get rid of it. But yeah, I assume you use the PID flavor of it, and then it's probably very, very simple. Yeah.
And what would the advantage be of using the SPIFFE delegate API over our current XDS mechanism?
So the current XDS mechanism also doesn't pass in the PID reference. It's because it's the workload that does it, right? And then we get the PID from socket option peer creds. And in this case, it's cTunnel, which is kind of a trusted infrastructure component we would trust to give us the right PID. Right, so that kind of trust model and the entire shape of the API in this case is different, because when we're actually talking in this API, it's two trusted infrastructure components talking to each other, compared to untrusted workload to a trusted component. That makes sense.
I think so. So the XDS mechanism simply looks at who's contacting it because it has access to the socket.
Yeah.
Put that by PID and checks identity that way. Whereas
Exactly.
this would allow zTunnel to specify which PID it's requesting a certificate for because it's a trusted entity. Would it be possible for the zTunnel, you know, we're already doing all of that net namespace entry stuff with zTunnel so that we're able to open a socket inside the pod net namespace. Is it possible to leverage that so that we're still using XDS and Spiffy sees the PID we want it to see on this open socket? Sorry, I don't know a ton about the relationship between PIDs and network namespaces, so I'm looking to the people with more low-level Linux networking experience here.
I also don't have much experience, but I did investigate a bit with file descriptor parsing. But it never worked out in the way that I wanted to be. Maybe I'm missing context, but yeah.
Okay, PID namespace and network namespace look like they, according to Michael in the chat, are two different sorts of namespaces. And I'm guessing PID impersonation is not something that we have the privilege to do in zTunnel.
We have cap sysadmin, or is that for CNI? Either CNI or zTunnel has the cap sys admin permissions, which in theory should allow you to sort of get the PID, I would think. If CNI got it, in theory, it could pass it to zTunnel as well. I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
So you can't do it that way. And this is part of where I kind of ran into some struggles. In short summary, I've implemented a simple POC using the Spire delegated identity. So yeah, these are two different namespaces. And currently, right now, zTunnel runs in its own PID namespace. And the question here is that you need to get the correct PID from the perspective of the host. Because obviously, if you get the PID from the pod's perspective, you're just going to get like 1, 2, 3. You're not going to get the host PID is what you would need to do the workload attestation. So you need to now say like zTunnel needs to share the host PID in this case to just be able to retrieve it. Does that help, or does that make things more muddy?
So in the CNI, we do a search for the pause containers process ID as we're going through like the process of configuring all of this. And
Which
I don't know
PID
if we passed that.
Do you need pause PID, or do you need the workload PID for the attestation? And like in the cryo world, for example, I don't think they even have a pause container anymore. Someone can fact check me on that. I know for container D, that's the case.
That's actually fair. We're not explicitly looking for pause. We're hoping to find it. We're looking for the oldest process that lives in the C group.
Oh, so then, yeah, you're using the C group approach. That's exactly what I actually went with. So you effectively interrogate this sysfs C group directory, pod UID, go through and find the oldest directory there.
I'm a bit
Actually-
curious. Sorry.
Go ahead, Costin.
What is the purpose of PID? Because once you get the certificate, it's there. I mean, anyone can use it. It applies to other PIDs. It's not specific to a PID. It's specific to a workload and the workload entity, not necessarily which PIDs are running inside the process.
Well, if the certificate is delivered via XDS to the process that is identified by that PID, what happens to it after that is up to that process, right? So it is restricted to the PID. Now, the PID could choose to persist it to disk or to put it into shared memory space.
No, but Mitch, I mean, you have three processes running with three different user IDs inside the pod. Each of them will use, when they make network connections, will use the same certificate, and they will pretty much use the same assertion. So it will not be that it's bound to a particular process, like it's or user ID, Unix user ID. In a pod, you can have 10 user IDs or 100 user IDs, and each of them are different, and processes are also different.
But the identity is one, you're saying?
Exactly.
I want to just say that for Istio, that might be the case. In Spiffy, we allowed giving two different containers to different identities. But that is, for this situation, I don't think relevant. Just like we actually, yeah.
Even in a container, you can have, if the container starts as root, you can run processes as 10 different users. And I mean, there are people who run entire Unix inside the container. I mean, not necessarily the old style where a single process, a single ID, and everything is. But I don't know. Seems a bit misleading to users to claim that we have a certificate minting a particular user ID, Unix user ID, and process ID, when in fact there is no way to guarantee it.
Yeah.
Well,
So
what do you mean you can't guarantee it? Like with PID FTS, like say, if, give an example here, like where you have process A, you've done an attestation, it's using PID 10 from the root PID namespace. That PID now goes away. Another PID process is scheduled now choosing like the same PID, like 10, for example. Can you clarify what you're saying?
You're asking me, or
Yes.
So is that what I mean is that in it's not only the PID but also the user ID and pretty much everything that can change inside the container. So the certificate is used by all the processes running in the container with all the user IDs and all the PIDs. We are not at network level. We don't know which PID is making, so we cannot use different certificate based on the PID.
yeah, that is for the Istio and ambient not the case. I just wanted to highlight that normal in other deployments where our workloads don't use Istio, we actually differentiate and we also attest based on user name and stuff. So that is possible. However, for this situation, I don't think this is in any way possible because, as you guys say, you don't get to that level. I think your highest level is always the pod, isn't it? Your lowest level is always the pod. Sorry, maybe I'm making this much more confusing than, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's exactly how Istio works. It's pod is the only thing that is visible at network level.
Okay. Maybe to get to the thread from before. So, if you're able to impersonate the host PID, you can actually use the API as it is today and how the sidecar model uses XDS. All right, so then in that case, we actually don't even know this is ambient mode. We just think this is the workload requesting certificate. Right? That would be probably the easiest approach. We don't even need a different API. It's everything as before. Yeah, the new API is created on the assumption that we cannot do that. And that's why cTunnel would need to give us the PID so we can then start attestation. And what we then also do with the PID is we figure out also for C groups, what is the container ID, and from there we then go our way upwards the Kubernetes objects.
Yeah, I think I'd at least like to explore the XDS option and PID impersonation and ensure that it's not feasible for some reason before we try to depend on a new API that is unique to Spiffy, whereas XDS is a generic format. There may be reasons why it's not feasible. Like I'm hearing Zappa say that he had tried a few things in that direction, didn't work out. If it's not feasible or not secure for other reasons, then it would seem that we need something else. But just want to do due diligence in that direction.
Yeah, I also want to highlight that to say that we can also use XDS and pass in the PID via XDS. Right, so XDS is quite powerful in this regard. So we could also just use XDS and build our own sort of flow within it to say, okay, cTunnel is requesting resource PID colon / and then the PID identifier, and then we parse that and do our logic based on it, right? So there's this difference between XDS, the way it's done today, or using XDS as a quite powerful API to solve that problem within it too. Right?
Okay. So sorry, I'm trying to keep up and I'm a little slow in this space. If we pass in the PID via XDS, we still need some mechanism to mark zTunnel as a trusted delegation controller, right?
That would actually be us doing peer creds and identifying cTunnel through that, right? Because cTunnel would be the peer, and we would then identify cTunnel and do the authentication to use this API through that.
Okay. Jackie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I might have missed this, and I feel like I always ask this, but do we have a design doc for this, or just, I think it'd be easier for me to understand like what we're discussing here and the trade-offs here and the different options we've considered.
So not specifically, there's a design doc that Arndt has pointed us to, or a design, I guess they use GitHub for their design, so it's not a Google doc, but for the work in Spiffy to create the delegate API. Then there's also a historical design doc that I'd need to look a little bit to find that explains how SDS works in sidecar mode today.
Yes. Yep.
Those are good for context, but what would probably be a good thing would be to have a doc now bringing those two things together and comparing, contrasting, so that we have the options all presented in one place.
Yeah, I think it would help me have more opinions in this conversation, just to see that consolidated. Because yes, I have the SDS workflow in Sidecar, but I don't think we have something similar for ambient, at least that I know of.
I'll find that document. For what it's worth, today's ambient zTunnel does not use XDS. So it would need, even if we go with the XDS method, we would need to add an XDS client into the zTunnel because that's not how it does secret distribution today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. To give the other topics also space, then I'll say maybe we can put this again on the agenda in 2 weeks' time.
I think that would be good. That's not quite into KubeCon yet, is it? No, it's not. Yeah, it would be good to talk about this again, and maybe Arndt and Michael, I can follow up with you guys and maybe try to start between the three of us getting some kind of a doc together comparing these options. Arndt, are you on? How do I get in touch with you? Are you on the Istio Slack?
Istio Slack, is that the CNCF Slack or is it the dedicated one?
No, we have our own, but if you're on the CNCF Slack, I can touch base with you there.
Yeah, I'm on there.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest getting on the Istio Slack, Arndt, because we're probably going to end up talking about this feature and reviewing it there, and that's where you're going to get the audience. So.
Okay, I will join that.
Good point. And I will share in a moment while Ian is doing his thing, both the doc that's been requested and the link for joining the Istio Slack will be in the call chat here. Ian, why don't you take us away?
Sure. We can get into it or not, but I just wanted to at least let everyone know that I had written a doc based on some of the feedback from last week on improving how ambient resolves services. At the very least, I would appreciate if folks have time to take a look if you're interested. Yeah, do we want to dive into it or?
Yeah, why don't you walk us through it? We've got 13 minutes, and is Liam with us today? Do we need to keep time for him too?
I am, but I can summarize mine by, I've written up the design doc. If you want me to add more details, let me know. If you want me to add more sections, let me know. Otherwise, we can just do it in the design doc.
Mostly a request for review of something that we requested a doc on.
Pretty much, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Liam. All right. Ian, let me find the right tab, and then I'll take us into that doc. Here we are.
All right. So this is really similar to sort of what we had talked about last week. Essentially, internally, all of our host names are namespaced. And when we're trying to resolve a host name in zTunnel, we are matching it with the sort of client's namespace and saying, is it defined there? Then we look at a preferred namespace, which is configurable, but we can just think of it like Istio system. And then if neither of those fails, we just take first, which has no real concrete definition for us. Yeah, it's really just based on how our internal data structures wound up being populated. One of the questions from last time was, how do we do this for like envoys, sidecars and whatnot? And each envoy only has like a singular sort of view of a service. And so this all happens inside IstioD, but we're essentially sorting by creation time and populating the oldest one for the correct scope. So that's fairly similar to the proposal that I was talking about for zTunnel, with the exception that zTunnel will need to do some of this like sorting in the data plane, because it does not have that benefit of having like a single scoped view of what a service is. So I think that covers the background. The goal is to make this stable and deterministic somehow. I have called out a non-goal of handling any sort of service scoping like export to. I don't think that solves the problem. It kind of constrains the problem and maybe makes it more manageable, but I don't really think that's it. Yeah, we mentioned that the idea is to essentially add creation time into our WDS service API, so we can sort on that. Yeah, a couple of alternatives. Does anyone have like questions about, I guess, the background or idea?
So I've heard some discussion around whether creation time is the right metric. I kind of wanted to check the pulse in the room. I think overall, deterministic is better than non-deterministic. Can we agree on that as kind of a design principle here? Even if it's arbitrarily deterministic, we could do an alphanumeric sort. And I think that would be better than. Does anyone want to disagree with that? Sort of a weird way to introduce a topic, but I kind of want to see how much on the same page we are.
I am definitely in agreement with deterministic is better.
Okay. So if we assume deterministic is better, is creation time the best field to use for that determinism?
I'll go. Or sorry, if anyone
I
else
was going to
wants to.
say that is deterministic, assuming that you don't then delete and recreate the same resource with exactly the same name, right? I don't know if this actually maps into how
Yeah.
this is modeled, but I know DocuSign have had this issue where they had this exact problem about this thing.
So creation time is deterministic, but it's not one of the declarative fields of the API, right? So how your, let's say, GitOps reconciler orders objects as it reconciles them into the cluster would impact routing decisions. So deterministic, but not declarative. I wonder, is there a declarative field that would be a better option? And then Ian, I know you wanted to speak, I think, in defense of creation time.
No declarative field comes to mind for me. Doesn't mean there's not one, but it's not jumping out.
Is name declarative? Or are we seeing names getting transformed in the GitOps pipeline dynamically like pod names do?
That, I guess that would just be going to like alphanumeric. Sort
I'm
by
thinking
name.
out loud here. I don't have like a predetermined goal here. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be. I think the issue that I would have with that is I come up and I'm in a namespace called aardvark now, and suddenly I can just take everyone's host name definition, even if it's been existing for years, which is deterministic at least, but it's also like a very easily exploitable thing. So
yeah,
I guess.
Oh, go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
I was going to say, my defense of creation time is that's what we do for sidecars today.
Okay.
It's slightly different because it's all inside of Istio, but that's how we're resolving it if there's a conflict today within a specific service scope. I do think this is also exploitable and perhaps not the best thing to be doing, because service entry, as we're all painfully aware of, allows you to define multiple hosts. So that means I can just go ahead and add a new host to a very old service entry, and suddenly it hijacks that host name for everyone, which isn't great, but that is just like a current problem that we haven't solved or accepted.
Oh, and Mike is pointing out in the chat here that Gateway API also specifies that the oldest wins.
It's alphabetical first, and then oldest wins if there's a tie.
How would you have an alphabetical tie on name?
I forget. I know that it has come up.
Okay.
Different
I actually
API
don't see
versions,
the
maybe.
alphabetical part of this. Maybe I'm not reading it well.
Oh, sorry. It's the inverse of that. It's timestamp first and then falls back to alphabetical if the timestamp is the same, because that could conflict.
Okay.
So if you have GitOps apply two resources at the same time that would conflict, then it goes to alphabetical.
Okay. I'll say for that, for my part, that's definitive. I would rather be consistent than right. So even if creation time has some unpleasant side effects to it, I would like to not have one resolution method for Gateway API and another resolution method for service entries. That sounds terrible.
That's fair. The alternative, there's a footnote that's just off screen right now that I had sort of proposed to resolve the sudden change thing. We're now doing a lot of stuff with status, like we write VIPs into status when we automatically assign them. and we could note the time, like the time that this host name was first seen, effectively creating a creation timestamp for the host name within the resource itself. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but if we want to start working on resolving that, like hijacking it just by having a very old service entry, we could look at something like that.
I mean, I don't think we should be reading status. I think we can write it, but we shouldn't be making decisions on status. Is that, I feel like that breaks kind of the read write.
You
of
could also
status.
you could also spoof the status, right? Like you could just
Yeah.
change it.
I do like the idea of writing, though. I think the Gateway API link that Mike shared in the chat references alerting in the status field when there are conflicts, and as well as maybe indicating which is the winner of the conflict, so that it's visible to the user that there is a problem. I recently was on a call with a customer who had this very issue. Thousands of namespaces that they didn't have a lot of controls over with no sidecar resource. Of course, it wasn't an ambient mode in particular, it was sidecar mode, but they didn't know there was a conflict. Someone in one of the 1,000 namespaces wrote a service entry that was extraordinarily broad and ended up affecting traffic across pretty much all of the namespaces accidentally. So getting indication when there's a conflict, including a reference to the conflicting entity, would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think we could do something like that sort of generally and just say, listen, here are the 5 other things that define this host name in your like service registry.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's a problem, we can't determine, because like your particular client could have a local definition that's going to take ownership, and that's fine. You don't care. You're getting the one you want, even if there's a bunch of other conflicts in other namespaces. So yes, generally we can say here's a bunch of things that also define it, but whether or not it's a problem is something you'll have to work out based on your namespace.
For what it's worth, that's exactly how the analyzers work today. None of them are absolutely errors, or we would just be able to block them with validation. They're probable errors that we want to let the user know about. So sticking this into an analysis message would probably make sense, or maybe even something stronger, since analysis messages, I think, have been stuck in alpha with status field for a while.
Nice. On a related note, I have a PR out. Stephen filed it, and I'm taking over it since he went on vacation. That is similar to this problem, except within a single namespace, and trying to resolve that problem. It's a very nasty bug as well. So if you're interested in this topic and want to constrain your thoughts to a single namespace for a moment, you can take a look at that. It's it doesn't fix this, and it's only tangentially related. But I will say on that one, we could do much better writing of status, because within a namespace, we can know which service entry becomes the canonical one that is actually taking over and which ones are being discarded.
Could you share the link to that in the chat?
Yes.
Ian, thanks for taking the lead on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been on my mind for a minute, so happy to sort of get the thoughts out.
All right, well, I think that's the end of the agenda, and I actually have a hard stop here and another meeting to get to. I feel like it was a really productive meeting. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you next week.
All right, since this chat's going away, Jackie, I'm going to put the thing in the contrib channel on. Yep, cool. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.